I crossed out 3 lines of his letter with a single stroke. The quill did not tremble. My hand did not shake. But the silence that followed, that silence had weight. It pressed against every wall of the Duke of Ashworth study like water rising in a sealed room. 14 people watched me do it. His steward, his solicitor, his 3 senior clerks, the footman by the door. Every soul in that room had served His Grace longer than I had been alive in London, and not one of them had ever touched his correspondence without explicit instruction. I had been employed for 6 days. The ink was still wet on his signature when I saw it. 3 lines in the middle of a letter addressed to the Lord Chamberlain's office, regarding a Crown Commission on entailed properties. 3 lines that, if sent as written, would have committed the Duke to surrendering rights over 2 estates his family had held since the reign of George II. Not because he intended to surrender them, because a previous clerk had transposed 2 clauses from an older draft, and no one had caught the error. No one except the temporary secretary hired from an agency in Cheapside, because His Grace's regular man had broken his wrist falling from a horse. I should have raised my hand. I should have cleared my throat and said, "Your Grace, if I may," and waited for permission, and phrased it delicately, and let someone more senior confirm my reading before a single mark touched that page. Instead, I reached across the desk, lifted the quill from its rest, and drew 1 clean line through the offending passage. Then I looked up. The Duke of Ashworth was already looking at me. He was not what I had expected when the agency sent me to Curzon Street. The name Ashworth conjured images of a florid, ageing lord surrounded by dusty ledgers, not a man of perhaps 32 with dark eyes, sharp cheekbones, and the particular stillness of someone who had learned very young that his silence was more frightening than most men's shouting. He did not speak. He looked at the letter. He looked at the line I had drawn. He looked at me. Mr. Pemberton, the chief steward, made a sound like a man swallowing a live coal. "Miss Hartley," he began. The Duke held up one hand. Pemberton stopped as if the air itself had hardened around his throat. "Read me what you struck," the Duke said. His voice was low, unhurried, and entirely without warmth. I read it. Then I read what the clause would have meant, legally, if the letter had reached the Lord Chamberlain's office. Then I read what it should have said. The silence that followed lasted longer than the first. Then the Duke of Ashworth did something that, according to the staff who told me later, he had not done in the presence of employees in living memory. He smiled. I should explain how I came to be standing in the study of one of England's most powerful men, with ink on my fingers and no right to be there. My name is Eleanor Hartley, and 6 months before that morning, I had been Miss Eleanor Hartley of Dorset, the only daughter of a country solicitor with a modest practice, a well-stocked library, and the firm conviction that a woman's mind was no less sharp than a man's, only less permitted. My father taught me law the way other fathers teach their daughters needlework, in the evenings, by the fire, with patience and the quiet assumption that competence was its own justification. By the time I was 18, I could draft a lease, pass an Act of Parliament, and spot a transposition error at 40 paces. Then my father died, and I discovered that his modest practice had been rather less modest in its debts. The house was sold, the library was sold, everything was sold, except me. And that was only because my mother's sister in London took me in before the creditors could suggest I sell myself in marriage to the butcher's son, who had hinted at it twice. My aunt was kind, but not wealthy. She secured me a position at the Whitmore Agency, a discreet firm that placed educated women as temporary secretaries, translators, and household clerks for the gentry. The work was respectable enough to preserve my reputation, and demeaning enough to remind me, daily, that respectability was the only currency I had left. I had been placed in 7 households in 6 months. I was efficient, invisible, and gone before anyone learned my first name. The Ashworth assignment was meant to last 2 weeks. The morning after the letter incident, I arrived at Curzon Street at 7 o'clock, as instructed, prepared to be dismissed. Instead, I was escorted to the study by a footman who held the door with a deference I had not previously been afforded. Inside, the Duke was standing behind his desk with a document in his hand. "Miss Hartley," he said, "do you know what this is?" "No, Your Grace." "It is a contract of permanent employment. The position is secretary to the household, reporting to me directly, not through Mr. Pemberton. The salary is £80 per annum, with rooms in the East Wing." He set the document on the desk. "I had it drawn up this morning." I stared at him. £80, rooms, permanent. "Your Grace, I should tell you that the Whitmore Agency has a contract regarding—" "I have already written to Mrs. Whitmore. She has released you." The efficiency of it stunned me. He had decided, acted, and resolved every obstacle before I had walked through the door. It was, I realised, how he did everything, with the swift, total authority of a man accustomed to the world rearranging itself to accommodate his decisions. "You caught an error that would have cost me 2 estates," he said. "My chief steward did not catch it. My solicitor did not catch it. 4 clerks with a combined 60 years of service did not catch it." He looked at me the way one might examine a mechanism one had not expected to find inside a common clock. "I do not promote people as rewards, Miss Hartley. I promote them because it would be negligent not to." I signed the contract. That was my first mistake, though I would not understand it as one for many weeks. Because the contract bound me to his household, and his household, I would learn, was a place where proximity to the Duke of Ashworth was the most dangerous position in England. The trouble began, as trouble in great houses always does, with the people who had been there longest. Mr. Pemberton had served the Ashworth family for 23 years. He had managed the household through the old Duke's death, the current Duke's succession at the age of 20, and the quiet, methodical reconstruction of an estate that the previous generation had nearly ruined through neglect and poor counsel. He had never once been overruled by a woman half his age, and he had never once been asked to report alongside one, rather than above her. He did not confront me. That was not his way. He simply began to make my work more difficult in 100 small, unchallengeable ways. Documents arrived late. Rooms I needed were occupied. Staff I required for errands were unavailable. Messages meant for me were delivered to his office first, opened, read, and returned with apologies for the confusion. I documented every instance. I said nothing. 3 weeks into my appointment, the Duke summoned me to the library to review the quarterly accounts, a task Pemberton had always performed alone. "Sit," the Duke said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. I sat. The chair was closer to his desk than I had expected, close enough that when he leaned forward to push a ledger toward me, I caught the scent of him. Ink, sandalwood, the faint warmth of wool from his coat. I looked at the ledger. "The tenants at Briarfield are paying 4 shillings less per quarter than the rate set in June," I said, because looking at numbers was safer than looking at him. "I'm aware." "You're aware that you're losing revenue?" "I'm aware that the harvest failed in August, and the alternative was eviction." He turned a page. "I don't evict families because the weather is unkind." It was the first time I had heard him say something that was not a command, an observation, or a correction. It was, impossibly, an explanation, offered voluntarily to a secretary. I looked up from the ledger and found him watching me with an expression I could not name. Not cold, not warm. Something between assessment and curiosity, as if he were reading a document that kept revealing unexpected clauses. "You're staring, Miss Hartley," You're being surprising, Your Grace. The corner of his mouth moved. Not a smile, something smaller and more private, the ghost of one, visible only because I happened to be sitting close enough to see it. Continue with the accounts, he said. But his voice had shifted half a register lower, and he did not look away first. Over the weeks that followed, I learned the Duke of Ashworth the way one learns a difficult text, slowly, with frequent misreadings, and with the growing suspicion that the most important passages were the ones written in the smallest hand. He was feared by his staff and respected by his peers, and I came to understand that these were not the same thing, and that he knew the difference, and that it cost him something he never discussed. He had inherited at 20, too young, with an estate too damaged, and a father whose reputation had left the family name smelling of debt and poor judgment. He had spent 12 years rebuilding, and the effort had calcified something in him. He did not ask for opinions, he did not explain himself. He made decisions with a speed and finality that left no room for discussion, and the result was a household that ran with mechanical precision and a man who lived at the centre of it entirely alone. I saw this because my office was adjacent to his study, and sound carried through old walls. I heard him working at midnight. I heard the silence at his dinner table when he ate alone, which was most evenings. I heard him dismiss his valet with 3 words every night. That will do. In a voice so carefully emptied of feeling that the absence itself became a kind of confession. I should not have been listening. I should not have been noticing. But proximity, I was learning, is its own kind of violence to the careful boundaries a woman in my position must maintain. It was during the 5th week that the boundaries began to fracture. I was in the small archive room on the 2nd floor, searching for a surveyor's report from 1819, when the Duke entered without knocking. He stopped when he saw me, standing on a step stool, reaching for a high shelf, my dress pulled tight across my shoulder and my hair half fallen from its pins where the shelf edge had caught it. "Miss Hartley?" I startled. The step stool rocked. His hand was at my elbow before I understood he had crossed the room, firm, immediate, steadying me with the same efficient authority he applied to everything. Except his hand did not leave. I was standing 1 step above him, which placed us at the same height, and his face was inches from mine, and his fingers were still wrapped around my elbow, and neither of us moved. "I have the report," I said. My voice came out smaller than I intended. Good. His voice was rough. The space between us hummed. I could feel the heat of his hand through 2 layers of fabric. I could see the faint scar above his left eyebrow, the fleck of ink on his jaw where he had rubbed it while writing. He was so close that I could have counted his eyelashes, and I understood with sudden, horrible clarity that I wanted to. He released my arm. He stepped back. He said, "Bring it to the study when you're ready." And he left. I stood on that step stool for a long time after, holding a report I could not have read if my life depended on it, because my hands were shaking and my pulse was a riot, and the place where his fingers had gripped my elbow burned as if he had pressed a brand there. This was the precise moment I understood that I was not merely employed by the Duke of Ashworth. I was in catastrophic trouble. I might have managed it. I might have pressed it down, locked it away, maintained the professional distance that my position demanded and my survival required. Other women in service had managed it. The inconvenient awareness of a master's hands, his voice, the way he occupied a room. You do not act on it. You do not acknowledge it. You file it in the same place you file every other indignity and impossibility of being a woman, without fortune or family or power. And you carry on. I might have managed it, if not for Lady Meredith Vane. She arrived at Curzon Street on a Tuesday, unannounced, in a carriage that cost more than my annual salary, and a dress that cost more than the carriage. She was the daughter of the Marquis of Halford, beautiful in the hard, polished way of women who have been raised to understand that beauty is a form of currency, and that currency must be spent strategically. She was, I gathered from the instant electric silence among the staff, considered the most likely candidate for Duchess of Ashworth. The families had been connected for years. The match was expected. The only obstacle, apparently, was the Duke's stubborn refusal to propose. Lady Meredith swept past me in the entrance hall without seeing me. People like her did not see people like me. We were furniture. We were architecture. Except she did see me, or rather, she saw me later that afternoon, when she emerged from the drawing room and found me in the corridor, carrying a portfolio of documents to the Duke's study. "You," she said. "You're the new secretary." "Yes, my lady." She looked me over with the particular scrutiny of a woman assessing a threat she had not expected. I was not beautiful, not the way she was. But I was young, and I was in his house, and I had access to his private study, and Lady Meredith Vane had not survived a decade of the marriage market by underestimating her competition. "How quaint," she said. "A woman. I suppose His Grace finds it amusing." I could not speak to His Grace's amusement, my lady, only to his correspondence. Something flickered in her eyes, not anger exactly, but the recalibration of a woman who had expected meekness and found a spine instead. She smiled. It did not reach her eyes. "Well," she said, "how industrious." She left. I continued to the study, and if my heart was beating harder than it should have been, I told myself it was irritation, not fear. It should have been fear. 3 days later, Pemberton summoned me to his office. His face was a careful mask of professional regret. "I've received a communication from the Whitmore agency," he said. "It appears there was an irregularity in your references." My stomach dropped. "What irregularity?" "Mrs. Whitmore has informed me that one of your previous placements, the Chelton household, has lodged a complaint. Missing correspondence, I believe. Letters that were in the study before you arrived and gone when you left." He folded his hands. "I'm sure it's a misunderstanding, but Lady Meredith, who takes a great interest in the household's welfare, has suggested that a discreet inquiry might be appropriate." The accusation hit me like a slap. I had never stolen anything in my life. The Chelton placement had lasted 5 days. The family had been disorganised to the point of chaos, and I had left with nothing but my wages and a headache. But I understood, with the clarity of someone who has spent her life watching how power operates, exactly what was happening. Lady Meredith had not taken a great interest in the household's welfare. Lady Meredith had found a weapon and aimed it. "And the Duke?" I asked. "Does he know?" Pemberton's expression answered before his words did. "His Grace has been informed that there may be a concern regarding your suitability. He has asked me to handle the matter." The precision of it was elegant. She had not accused me directly. That would be vulgar and traceable. She had planted a seed with Pemberton, who was already disposed to resent me, and let the institutional machinery do the rest. The Duke would not dismiss me himself. He would not need to. The doubt would be enough. A woman in my position could not survive doubt. I had 2 choices: defend myself through the proper channels, which meant weeks of investigation during which my access to the study would be suspended and my reputation would wither, or go directly to the Duke and stake everything on the truth. My father's voice in my memory. "When the process is designed to destroy you, the only rational act is to step outside it." I went to the study. He was reading when I entered. He looked up with the expression he gave all interruptions, patient displeasure. "Miss Hartley, Pemberton is handling..." Pemberton is not handling it, Your Grace. Pemberton is facilitating it. I closed the door behind me. I should not have done that. A woman, alone, in a man's study with the door closed. It was precisely the kind of situation that destroyed reputations. But my reputation was already under siege, and I needed him to hear me without an audience. The complaint from Chelton is fabricated, I said. I have never stolen a document in my life. The accusation was engineered by someone who wants me removed from this house, and it was delivered through Pemberton because Pemberton has resented my appointment from the first day and was a willing instrument. The Duke set down his papers. His face was unreadable. Those are serious allegations, Miss Hartley. Yes, Your Grace. So is accusing a woman of theft to destroy her livelihood. Something shifted in the air between us. He stood. He came around the desk. He stopped, closer than propriety allowed. Closer than a duke should stand to a secretary. Closer than a man should stand to a woman he employed. Closer than anyone should stand to another person when both of them were pretending, with increasingly transparent desperation, that proximity meant nothing. Who, he said quietly, do you believe engineered this? I think you already know. A beat of silence, too. His jaw tightened. Lady Meredith is the daughter of a marquis, and a guest in this house. And I am a secretary from Cheapside. I know the arithmetic, Your Grace. I am not asking you to choose sides. I am asking you to investigate before you condemn. His eyes held mine. They were very dark, nearly black in the low afternoon light, and I saw in them something I had not expected. Not doubt, not calculation. Fury. Not at me. Sit down, Miss Hartley, he said, and his voice was so controlled it frightened me more than shouting would have. I will look into this myself. What followed was the longest week of my life. The Duke did not suspend me. He did not restrict my access. He continued to summon me for accounts, correspondence, and the daily review of household business, and he said nothing about the investigation. But the quality of the silence changed. Where before our interactions had been brisk and professional, with occasional flashes of something warmer, now they were loaded with the weight of a conversation we were not having. On the fourth day, he asked me to stay after the evening's accounts were finished. I wrote to the Chelton household, he said. The missing correspondence was located in Lord Chelton's hunting lodge, where he had taken it himself and forgotten. There was no theft. There was never a complaint. The letter to the Whitmore agency was sent on fabricated stationery. He paused. I also spoke to Pemberton. He has accepted a generous pension and will depart at the end of the month. The relief was so intense I felt it in my bones. And Lady Meredith? Lady Meredith will not be returning to this house. His voice was perfectly level, but the words landed like a judge's gavel. I have informed her father that the connection between our families, while valued, does not extend to permitting his daughter to manufacture accusations against members of my household. I exhaled. My hands, folded in my lap, were trembling. You dismissed her, I said. A marquis's daughter? For a secretary? I dismissed a liar, he said, for the truth. The rank of the parties is irrelevant. But it was not irrelevant, and we both knew it. A duke does not publicly sever ties with a marquis's family without consequence. There would be talk. There would be speculation. There would be, inevitably, the question everyone in London would ask. Why would the Duke of Ashworth burn a powerful alliance to protect a woman who files his correspondence? He knew the question would come. He had done it anyway. I looked at him across the desk. This man who decided things with terrifying speed, who had rebuilt his family's name by never making a move that did not serve a strategic purpose. And I understood that this had not been strategic at all. This had been something else entirely. "Your Grace," Edmund. The word fell into the silence like a stone into still water. His first name. Offered not as a slip, not as an accident, but deliberately. A door opened that could not be closed. "You cannot ask me to call you that," I whispered. "I am not asking. I am telling you my name." He stood very still. "Because you deserve to know it from me, not from a title." The distance between us was 6 feet. It might as well have been 6 inches. The air was charged with everything we had not said for 7 weeks. Every glance held too long, every accidental touch. Every evening I had heard him working alone through the wall and wished, with a ferocity that frightened me, that I could knock on the door and simply be with him. Not as a secretary, not as an employee, as Eleanor. "Edmund," I said. Just the name, nothing else. His composure broke. I saw it happen, the controlled, precise exterior fracturing for one unguarded second, and beneath it a hunger so raw it stole my breath. His hand moved as if to reach for me. Then he pulled it back. He closed his eyes. He breathed. "You should go," he said, "before I do something that would make me precisely the kind of man I've spent my life refusing to be." I went. I did not sleep that night. I lay in my room in the East Wing and pressed my hand against my chest and felt my own heartbeat and thought, "This is impossible. This is ruinous. This will destroy both of us." And beneath that, quieter and more terrifying, I don't care. The fallout from Lady Meredith's banishment arrived exactly as I had predicted, in the form of Lady Ashworth, the Duke's mother. She descended on Curzon Street 3 days later, in a travelling carriage from the Dower House in Kent, with the air of a woman who had not been consulted on a decision that affected the family's future, and intended to correct the oversight immediately. The Dowager Duchess was not cruel. She was something more dangerous. She was correct. She understood the rules of their world with the same precision her son applied to estate management, and she saw, with a mother's instinct and a strategist's clarity, exactly what was happening. She summoned me to the morning room, not the Duke's study, her territory. "Miss Hartley," she said. She did not invite me to sit. "I will be direct with you, because I suspect you prefer directness to manoeuvring." "I do, Your Grace." "Good. Then hear me clearly. My son is a good man, but he is also a duke, and a duke does not have the luxury of following his inclinations. He is 32 years old. He needs an heir. He needs an alliance. He needs a wife whose family name opens doors that money alone cannot. You are none of these things." She said it without malice, with, in fact, a kind of weary compassion. "I am not telling you that you are unworthy. I am telling you that worthiness is not relevant. The world has rules, Miss Hartley. Your feelings do not change them." Every word was true. Every word landed like a blade between my ribs. "I have not pursued your son, Your Grace." "No," she said. "I don't believe you have. But he is pursuing you. He may not call it that. He may frame it as professional respect, or intellectual appreciation, or whatever language men use when they are trying to pretend that their hearts are not already forfeit. But I am his mother, and I have watched him for 32 years, and I know what it looks like when he has decided something." She paused. "And that is precisely why I am asking you to leave. Not because you have done anything wrong, but because staying will destroy you. A scandal with a duke does not wound a woman. It annihilates her. You will have no position, no reference, no prospect. And my son will survive it, because men always do. That is the injustice of it. That is the rule. I stood in that morning room with my back straight and my eyes burning and said nothing, because everything she had said was correct, and I hated her for it and respected her for it in equal measure. I returned to my room and began to pack. I was folding the last of my dresses into my trunk when I heard the door to the study slam, a sound so unprecedented in that carefully regulated household that 2 maids and a footman materialised in the corridor to stare. Then his voice, carrying through the walls as it always did, except this time it was not measured or controlled. It was fury, pure and incandescent. "You had no right." His mother's voice, steady. "I had every right. I am protecting this family." "You are protecting an idea of this family that died with my father. I have spent 12 years rebuilding what he destroyed, and I did not do it so that I could chain myself to the same hollow conventions that made him miserable, and made you miserable, and made everyone in this house miserable." A silence. Then the dowager. "Edmund, she is the only person in this household who has ever told me the truth, without first calculating whether I wanted to hear it. She is the only person who has looked at me, not the title, not the estate, not the political advantage, and seen a man she would challenge to his face. And you asked her to leave because her father was a country solicitor instead of a marquis." I was standing in my room with a half-packed trunk, and I could not breathe. "If she goes," he said, "you will have your alliance. You will have your pedigree. You will have everything the world considers correct. And you will have a son who goes back to eating dinner alone in a silent house and signing documents until midnight and wondering what exactly all of this was for." Silence. A long one. Then the sound of his footsteps, not toward the stairs or the door, but down the corridor, toward the east wing, toward me. He knocked once. He did not wait for an answer. He stood in the doorway and saw the trunk. His face went white. "You packed," he said. "Your mother made her position clear." "My mother does not run this house. I do." He stepped inside. He did not close the door. I understood why. Even now, even in this, he was protecting my reputation by ensuring the corridor remained visible to any passing servant. Even in fury, he was careful with me. "Miss Hartley, Eleanor, I need you to hear me say something that I should have said weeks ago, and did not, because I was afraid it would send you running. I am already running, Your Grace." "Edmund," he said, "my name is Edmund, and I am asking you, not ordering, not deciding, not arranging. I am asking you not to go." His voice cracked on the last word. The Duke of Ashworth, the man who had rebuilt a ruined legacy with nothing but discipline and silence, who commanded rooms by entering them, who had not shown a fracture in his composure in 12 years of leadership, stood in my doorway with his hands at his sides, and his jaw tight, and his eyes bright with something that looked terrifyingly like desperation. "I cannot promise you that this will be easy," he said. "I cannot promise you that the world will accept it. I cannot promise you that my mother will approve, or that society will not talk, or that every door currently open to me will remain so. But I can promise you this. I will never again allow someone to threaten you, to lie about you, or to suggest that you are less than you are. And if the price of that is every alliance, every expectation, and every convention I have ever been told to honour. I will pay it. Every time. Without hesitation. I looked at him. I looked at the trunk. I looked back at him. Your correspondence will be a disaster without me, I said. His laugh was raw and startled and real. The first genuine laugh I had ever heard from him, and it broke something open in both of us. He crossed the remaining distance in 2 strides, and his hands found my face, my jaw, the curve of my neck. And when he kissed me, it was not gentle or tentative or careful. It was the release of 7 weeks of restraint, of formality, of every rule that said a duke does not fall in love with his secretary, and a woman without fortune does not reach above her station. It tasted like ink and defiance and the terrifying, exhilarating certainty that we had chosen each other in full knowledge of the cost. When we broke apart, his forehead rested against mine, and he said, so quietly that only I could hear it, "Stay." "I'll stay," I said, "but I'm still correcting your letters." "I would be offended," he murmured, "if you stopped." We married in June, in the chapel at the Ashworth country estate, with wild flowers in the windowsills and 30 guests and the Dowager Duchess in the second pew, wearing an expression that had migrated, over the intervening months, from glacial disapproval through reluctant tolerance to something that, on the morning of the wedding, looked remarkably like pride. She had come around, not because Edmund had demanded it, but because I had refused to let her go. I had written to her. I had visited the Dower House. I had sat through 3 interminable teas, during which she interrogated me on estate law, household management, and the proper form of address for every rank of the peerage. And I had answered every question correctly, because my father had been a country solicitor who believed a woman's mind was no less sharp than a man's. On the 3rd visit, she had poured my tea before her own, a small gesture. In her language, an armistice. The ton talked, of course. They called it a scandal, a misalliance, a sign that the Duke of Ashworth had finally succumbed to the instability that ran in his father's line. They talked for the duration of 1 season. Then Edmund secured the crown appointment that Lady Meredith's false letter had nearly cost him. Secured it with a legal brief so devastating that the Lord Chamberlain's office implemented his recommendations within the month. And the talk shifted from his wife's origins to his brilliance, and the invitations began arriving faster than I could file them. I still filed them. I still managed his correspondence, reviewed his accounts, caught errors his solicitors missed. He had offered to hire a replacement secretary 3 times. I had refused 3 times. There was a particular satisfaction in being both the Duchess who hosted the dinner and the woman who ensured the seating arrangements were diplomatically flawless, and I was not yet ready to surrender it. On a Tuesday evening in November, 6 months after the wedding, nearly a year after I'd first crossed out 3 lines of a duke's letter and changed the course of my life, I was in the study, reviewing a lease amendment, when Edmund came in and set a cup of tea on my desk without being asked. I looked at the cup. I looked at him. "You made me tea," I said. "I am capable of basic tasks, Eleanor." "You are a duke. Dukes do not make tea." "This duke does. This duke makes tea for his wife when she is working late because he would like her to come to bed eventually. And he has learned that asking directly results in a lecture about tenancy agreements." I laughed. He sat on the edge of the desk, informally, comfortably, with the ease of a man who no longer held himself apart from everything and everyone around him, and watched me drink the tea with an expression that still, after all these months, made my pulse quicken. On the desk between us lay the original letter, the one I had corrected on my 6th day, framed now under glass. He had had it preserved. 3 lines struck through in my hand, his signature beneath them, and in the margin, in his handwriting, added later, "She was right." 2 words. The most romantic thing anyone has ever written. I set down the tea. I reached across the desk and took his hand. "Come to bed," I said. "The tenancy agreements can wait." He smiled. Not the ghost of a smile, not the controlled twitch of a man guarding himself against feeling. A real one. Wide and warm and still, after everything, slightly surprised by its own existence. He followed me out of the study and down the corridor. And when we passed the spot in the hallway where he had once stood in my doorway and asked me to stay, his hand tightened on mine. Just for a moment. Just enough to say, "I remember." And neither of us let go.